Welcome to WitchLit, a place to talk about the craft of writing and writing the craft. I'm your host, Victoria Raschke, author, publisher, witch, and nosy Scorpio. Lisa McSherry is an author, priestess, and world traveler. As the leader of Jaguar Moon Coven, she has been teaching the basics of witchcraft since 2000. She's also the author of Magical Connections, Creating a Healthy and Lasting Spiritual Group, and The Virtual Pagan 2.0. Lisa is a popular presenter at conferences and has been featured on many pagan podcasts and is the founder of the website facingnorth.net. Lisa McSherry, welcome to WitchLit.
Thank you. It is a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you on. And I feel like we have a lot in common from our pre-recording chats. So it'll be nice to kind of dig into this writing part too. So our first question for everybody is, in the age of the internet and social media, why write? Why write books?
Well, for two reasons. One of which is I don't know how to not write. And sometimes a book evolves from it. So when I have a book there, it's like, well, I might as well try to publish it. And I've been lucky enough to have publishers say, well, yes, that. But then also because I think it's a really good way to reach people who otherwise don't find me on social media or the internet and such. So, it's a different audience.
And you do have a background in also creating resources and space on the internet for pagans and witches too. So you kind of have both flanks covered a little bit.
I do. It's true. I've had websites since back when you had to code your own HTML long before the days of CSS and WordPress and all these wonderful modern things. I've got sites in Joomla, I've got sites in WordPress, I've got sites probably in something else that's escaping me off the top of my head. But I've been doing this for a long time, and it's kind of funny because I'm not actually all that technologically savvy. I'm an incredibly good user and technician of the products that are out there. But I find technology very frustrating, ironically.
Yeah, I look out in that my husband works in tech, and so I have built-in tech support at home, which makes me a little lazy in learning things, unfortunately, because I can always rely on him to fix it. But occasionally I do have to go down the Google and YouTube rabbit hole and fix it myself. So.
Yes. Oh, yes. Thank goodness for someone else doing exactly the same thing you're trying to figure out and writing it up and sharing it.
Yes. I cannot tell you how many tiny things in my apartment or house I've fixed because I watched someone do it on YouTube.
Oh, yeah.
Like I think about talking about it in books. Like my dad, my parents had this big yellow homeowner's manual that I think Rodale Press or somebody did like that. That anytime anything there was a problem when we were kids, he would go look at this book, and I'm like, oh, that's basically YouTube now.
Yeah.
So.
Oh yeah. I actually had a book like that made by Black & Decker, and it was everything from repairing drywall to replacing part of your screen in a window and how to clean your gutters. And it was great, actually, when I was a homeowner. It was like, let's
all
just,
those lovely hand-drawn line art of instructions and stuff. Yeah. I love this.
Well,
Well, it's sad to think of them dying out, but I also think people, there's definitely a prepper market for them. So.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So you've published a couple books before this new book, The Witch's Guide to Crafting Your Own Practice. Did I get that right? I'm bad with long titles. And I also have it as an ebook. So it's weird that you never look at the cover of an ebook as much.
Yeah. Because you just jump right to the content.
Yeah. So the title, especially longer ones, sometimes elude me a little bit. But so what did getting published the first time look like for you? What was that journey from, writing, I guess, on the internet? It sounds like that happened first and then publishing.
So it was 2000 and turn of the century and all this excitement. And for those of you listening in, you have to imagine that the internet is this incredibly new thing. People are learning that they can make their own web pages. So you have all these wonderful free hosting services like GeoCities and everyone is rushing to go online. And the internet was seen as this incredible new place of sharing information and connecting to people. And this was just starting to leak into the pagan world. So I wrote a book called The Virtual Pagan, which, among other things, included a whole chapter on how to get online, what hardware you had to buy for your computer, and what software you needed to actually connect to the internet, and then finding people online.
Wow.
Because there was a whole thing there. Yeah, it's a very charming book to look back on now because things have changed so much.
So fast. Yeah, so much, so fast. Yeah.
Exactly. So much happened so fast. And I was lucky enough, I wrote the book, and there were sort of two parts to my original manuscript. One was kind of the practical, how to get online and find people and what to do when you get there. There's a lot of how to deal with the politics and what is a flame war. And then the second part of it was much more delving into the group dynamics and what it's like to work with a group. Less of a focus on being online, but just actually sort of doing the group work. And I brought it to Red Wheel Weiser, and they were like, "We love it. We can't publish this whole thing. It's actually 2 books. So we're just going to do The Virtual Pagan, and we'll see about maybe doing the other book." And as it turned out, they didn't want to do the second book when all was said and done, which is fine, because then I turned around and actually sold it a couple of years later to New Page, which is now owned by Red Wheel Weiser. It's kind of funny. And that second book was my second book, Magical Connections, which was literally all about what it's like to be in a group that it has a spiritual focus, and how it's really important to keep in mind that there's actually a life cycle of building and fighting and then coming to a resting place. And even what I think is really important, a place when you know when it is to say goodbye and actually close the group down, because a lot of groups still to this day just kind of peter out and fade away. And, there's one person sort of left maybe with the admin credentials to the web page or in the Facebook group or whatever. And that's how you know it's dead, because no one shows up anymore, which I just think is really energetically weird. So I was really lucky in my first 2 books, because I basically wrote one and then had 2 come out of it. And I'm really quite happy with both of them. As you may imagine, though, The Virtual Pagan went out of date approximately 5 years after it was actually published.
Yeah.
Eventually the rights actually reverted back to me about 2019, actually. And I was like, oh, good, because now we're 20 years later and I have a lot to say about how things have changed. And I'm one of the few people who's actually been doing all this work online for 20 years. And I'd had a lot of people who over the years were like, you cannot do magic online. You cannot do ritual online. You cannot teach magic to people online. Well, 2019, the whole world shifted and we all suddenly started staying home, and a whole lot of people who used to say it was impossible suddenly found themselves creating rituals, working magic and teaching, because otherwise you couldn't, period. Wow. No one was meeting, right, with the pandemic. So I updated it, revised it. It took me for so much longer than I expected it would, because I found I just had a whole lot to say, and I had to do a lot of research, because a major part of the new book is much more focused on security online and privacy online, and how there are major forces at work that are kind of mucking with that, and some things you can do to protect yourself in a lot of ways. And so I had to talk to a lot of experts, and people were really busy and distracted, so it took a little bit longer
Yeah.
But I republished it as the Virtual Pagan 2.0. And for fun, my 2 chapters on how to get online and how to find people online, I actually kept as appendices, just so that people can look back on the historical record and giggle, actually.
Yeah. Oh, that's kind of nice. Yeah. So did you publish it yourself?
I did. I self-published.
So what was that experience like, since you had already published with a publisher? What was it like to go solo?
Well, in some ways it was kind of nice because I got to control all of it. I'm very happy with what I produced. I'm very happy with how it turned out. Frankly, there's some really nice tools that make some of the hard parts very easy, like actually uploading your manuscript. But there's some tricky things, like you really can't have a lot of images. That doesn't really work with the electronic format. Interesting decisions like, are you going to go entirely electronic or are you going to do a print on demand? And figuring out the pricing, what's going to appeal to people, what's going to turn them away because it's too expensive.
Yeah.
With a dollop of, and you might ask this question, I might be jumping ahead a little bit here, or I may be stepping back, but I write because I think that people need to know what I have to say. And that's not an ego thing so much as I'm just a very practical nonfiction writer. I see a thing that needs to be addressed, I address it, and then it goes out into the world, either as an article, sometimes a blog post, or a book, if I have enough to say. So I was really concerned that the Virtual Pagan 2.0 would actually get to people. And I didn't want someone to say, oh, God, $12 for a Kindle, I can't afford that. And it's like, oh, okay. But, shall we say the large electronic publishing companies that make it very easy for you to get your e-copies do take a significant portion of each book for their own expenses. So
yes,
you kind of have to cover that, and then you want to make a little money on your own. So there's a little, what's worth it, what makes sense, what are other authors doing, where are you in that sort of space? And that was that was interesting, and actually opened my mind a little bit more to the traditional publishing process, because I had to kind of do it on my own. I'll tell you the biggest difference is that I didn't have anyone else supporting me in the marketing.
Yes.
I don't have a book distributor, right?
Yeah. Distribution and marketing are where self-publishing is rough. It's just a lot harder to do that.
Rough. Yeah, exactly. Now, in traditional publishing, you still got to do social media. You have to do marketing. You do have to get out there. You can't just sit in your room and wait for the money to roll in, because it doesn't. But, at least with a traditional publisher, like you'll get an ad in a magazine or two, maybe there'll be a website, like Witches and Pagans or something like that, that'll start rotating an electronic ad. And that's $1,000 you didn't have to spend because they do it, right? And, $1,000 here, $1,000 there really adds up if you're self-publishing, when your book is not necessarily bringing you in thousands of dollars.
And you're taking, though you might get a bigger cut of each book's sales as a self-published person, as opposed to publishing with a publisher, your numbers are going to look different unless you just hit a seam and things take off. So
yeah, and that magic hasn't happened for me. I am a very, very prolific, almost unknown author. It kind of amuses me, but everyone who reads my stuff loves it. Yeah. So I'm happy with what I produce, and I think it finds its way to the right people.
Yeah.
So
I think that's a good way to look at it. I always, in the group of writers I know personally in meat space, or whatever we call it these days, that's kind of something we're always defining for ourselves. Like, what does success really look like? So what does that look like for you? What do you think success looks like for you?
I actually feel like my newest book is already a success because I had someone tell me how much they enjoyed it, and they enjoyed it so much that when they found my other writing and enjoyed
awesome.
that.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't say because it literally hasn't even launched yet, but it's like, okay, I'm done. You know, I literally had one person like everything so much that they're now a fan. And that's really gratifying. So, you know, other than that, I've been very privileged in that writing has not been the thing that supported me. It's, you know, up until I retired, it was the thing I also did.
Right.
Now I've retired just recently and I have a lot more time to focus on my writing, which is a bit of a mixed bag because I have a lot to say, but at the moment I think I have 3 books in my head. And
which one comes first? Like they're fighting.
Exactly. What comes first? Exactly. And I've had a very transitional year and I've not been able to focus on my writing very much. I've had a lot of things going on, but it's kind of like, okay, what next? And I'm not really quite sure. And I don't actually want to spend 8 hours a day writing. I don't actually want to replace my old job with a new job of writing. That's not fun at that point. But I do have things to say.
Well, I'm anxious or curious, I guess, to see which one thinks it's way out first.
Yes.
Yeah, I currently have 2 books fighting in my head because I just this weekend, as we're talking, this will come out later, but I finished finally a book I've been working on for 3 years. And
doesn't that feel good?
It does feel really good. It's the longest it's ever taken me to write a book. And I just, apparently the pandemic really slowed me down, and it was just really hard to kind of get through that. And I also had a short story due for a collection in the middle of that just took me forever to write. I don't know why. And so I got those out. I write fiction, so it's I don't know that it's that different from writing nonfiction, but in some ways it is because you're
very different.
You're spinning things whole cloth in a way. I mean, I do a lot of research because I tend to always pick topics I don't know that much about to write about. I am in the school of it's good to write what you know, but it's also good to write about what you want to know. so I get to do the research for that.
Figure all that out.
Yeah. But I have a nonfiction book I really want to write.
Ooh, okay. See, I think you'll find it's a very different process because nonfiction is much more, you are writing about what you know. I mean, you can write about what you don't know, but that's a much harder place to come from with nonfiction because there are plenty of people who do know and they're going to be skeptical about
why you get that out. Yeah.
Exactly. You know, whereas, you know, fiction, it is much more, well, this is my story. And, you know, no one can say, well, that story is wrong because it's your story. Yeah. And that's like saying to someone, oh, you're not really happy. It's like, well, it's my feelings, you know, sorry, but yeah. Anyway.
Well, and you can take leeway. I mean, this is the thing about fiction. You can take leeway. Like I have a lot of history and mythology and that kind of stuff in my books, but I also take side trails and make up things and like add that because it's fiction. I can do that. You know, I can play in my own sandbox, but I have yet to have anyone come and tell me I'm wrong because I do say this is a work of fiction. Someday I will have someone come and tell me I'm wrong, but it hasn't happened yet. So, but again, like I write a lot, but not a lot of people read it, I guess. Prolific unknown writer. I like that. I think I may have to add that to my tagline. Prolific and unknown.
Very prolific unknown writer. Yep.
Yeah, I like it a lot. So you kind of answered my question about like how much of your day is writing. It sounds like you don't really want this to be your new job post-retirement.
No, and I have a very on-again, off-again relationship with the muse. When the muse comes, I mean, I can write 5,000 words in a day, and it's like there'll be the chapter, boom, it's done, or that's the essay that I have to write or the article or whatever, I can spend a lot of time waiting for the impetus for that article or essay or chapter to come. The really tricky part for me, I admire people who say, I sit down and I write every day, whether it's 1,000 words or 10,000 words. I'm at my typewriter or whatever, word processor for X time every day. It's my job. I remember, do you remember the author Piers Anthony? He used to write the wonderful author's notes where he would explain his entire writing process. And at any given moment, he had 3 books going. There was the new one that he was working on. There was the one he'd already submitted that he was editing. And then there was the one that he was, I'd say put it flogging for marketing, So like that was his process. At any given time, he had 3 books going. And I was always like, that's insane. My brain doesn't. And they're all fiction, right? They're all these made up stories. And he's doing science fiction here and fantasy here and whatever else. And I find that fascinating and admirable. Not how I do it at all, very much so. If I have to get through a chapter and I'm slogging down, I'll still write because I give myself deadlines. But the new idea, coming from somewhere, that's much more random than I would like it to be. It's another reason why I never wanted to make my living off of writing, because it's too fickle, a relationship. But I am very lucky in that what I do write is pretty well polished when it comes out. Even going through this last editorial process for all 3 of my books, editing was not whole revisions. Yeah. It was kind of more like, this word choice that you use all the way through, let's find a different word. Okay, boom. But it was never, this whole chapter needs a whole redo.
Yeah. That's nice.
Yeah, and that's also very lucky. So it's like I'm slow at the writing part, but then I'm fast at the editing part.
Yeah.
And every once in a while things get by. But I think editors like working with me because I don't fight for individual words and mostly. And, I'm pretty clean what they get.
Yeah. I try not to die on the hill of a comma with my editor. She and I do occasionally disagree about things. I think I do wonder if there's something to that, like writing slow, the editing is different. I think I just macerate on it for so long. By the time it's out, it's pretty close to how I wanted it. It's taken me so long to think on it that by the time I'm getting it written, it's like, okay, this is pretty close.
Well, and one thing I have found, just since I'm not working a 9-to-5 job anymore, a regular hour job, ideas do come to me at very odd times. Wow. I've been doing a lot more middle of the night work. Like literally, I will wake up, at 3 a.m. or be awake at 3 a.m. And just actually a couple of weeks ago, I laid out a whole book. In about an hour, I did an outline for a whole book, and that's now like the second book that I want to write at the same time as the first book I want to write. So it's
you're slowly turning into the Piers Anthony approach to writing 3 books.
Yeah, no, I won't. I don't have time for that.
I have writer friends who write in different genres who write 2 books at the same time, and I'm just like, no, that's not how my brain works. I have to finish the one I'm on, and then I can do the next thing.
Yeah, I think I'm still too busy with magic things to really give enough time for all of that to happen. Plus life.
Yeah, life has been a lot the last couple of years. So, I think that.
Yes.
I think that's a lot for everybody. It's interesting to me, like some of the folks I've talked to on the show, like the pandemic really gave them space to write from their job or from, they were home, they could do things. And some people, it just like ground to a halt. Like it just really depended like on how they feed the well to some extent.
Wow.
I think for me, that was really the how I fed the well got quelched. Like I like to travel and that feeds the well and that wasn't happening. And, there was just stuff that kind of fed the writing that couldn't happen.
Very much. I do understand that. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you do write, other than at 3 a.m., like what is like your like writing sweet spot? Do you have like rituals around it when it happens? Or is it just like the muse is hot, I sit down and write wherever I am kind of thing?
Well, the music is hot. Music. I do actually play music. I like a good kind of a dance vibe going on. So, it's a very disparate soundtrack, if you will. It's 4,000 songs at any given moment. And that just kind of, and what ends up happening is I wiggle. You get to see this, listeners don't. I'm sitting here kind of wiggling in my chair.
There is a tiny chair dance going on for those who can't see. It's a tiny
chair dance, exactly. Lots of shoulder. And that actually kind of flows into how I'm actually writing and thinking about things. And I think, kind of going back to my general philosophy of writing is kind of along the lines of, I will tell you what it is I'm going to tell you. And then I tell you this piece of information. And then I really like the technique of thinking of some sort of practical way to set that information. So it's not just, my books really are never meant to be just read. And, it's not very academic in that sense of, read and talk about it. No. I'm always kind of like, okay, now you've read about this, so let's go do a thing. For example, my chapter on Book of Shadows, I actually have a thing in there about how to make your own book.
Right.
Or you can take paper, you can bind it. Here's one technique for binding. And, here's another technique for making your own ink, because it's kind of fun. So go putter. And I like sort of cementing my chapters with that. And so for me, it's like, topic, let's talk about the topic, and then let's figure out a way to bring the topic to life, make it happen. And then, okay, on to the next topic. So probably the hardest part for me sometimes is if I run myself into a place where I'm like, well, I've gone down this whole trail, but now the building blocks all need to be rearranged, because I thought there was a logical progression, but now there's this weird thing sticking out here that's just ugly, Yeah. So moving the chapters around, what flows, what makes sense for the reader. I think that's always like the last thing I do is like I step out of the manuscript. I like to put it down for at least a week. If I have time, and usually I do. And just like go away from it and then come back to it fresh and at least look at the outline and like, does this make sense? Does this flow? Does it take you from point A to point Z in a logical fashion? And that's like my final twiddly bits before I send it off to the publisher. And that's always kind of fun. This third book, it's been a decade since I last published anything, and so many things have changed in publishing and the conversations that authors have with their publishers. There's a lot more. It used to be my first 2 books, I basically send a letter on 3 chapters and said, so are you interested? Let's talk. And now it's, you want it to be interested, and this is why. You have to do this research. Like, who's going to read this book? How, you have to sort of sell your book to the publisher. And I was very, very lucky because the first publisher I reached out to was Llewellyn, and they wrote right back and said, yes, bring it on, let's do it. They also said what you sent us was too long, so you need to cut it in half. Cut it a lot. And I cut it in half and sent it back. And they're like, oh, too long. cut it again.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So, yeah, which is very weird because I'm not a particularly verbose writer at all. I just sent them too much information. We really condensed it down into what's presented in a witch's guide, which is just sort of foundational things.
Yeah.
Like
So I
just
guess, yeah. One of the questions I had reading it, I mean, I know, and you've been practicing long enough to know this too, that every year there's a crop of intro to witchcraft books. Like this is like just a seasonal thing that happens. And so I kind of wondered, like, what was the impetus to join that fray and do like a intro book that, because it seems, I mean, you're pretty advanced in your practice. You know, you've been doing this a while. So what was the seed for that?
The seed was pretty much, I looked at the 20 years that I've been teaching this online, and I actually took that entire course, and that was the original book. That was what I submitted to Llewellyn. It was, you know, the entire year, 12 months, 12 modules, as we teach it. Sort of, obviously, what you do online and on Zoom and et cetera, translating that into written form was a lot of what I was having to write and, you know, rephrase. And, you know, it's very convenient online if you point to, you know, famous author's website and say, read this essay on magic that they wrote. Isn't that lovely? Let's talk about it. Whereas you can't just, you know, take that essay and put it in your book.
Right.
Kind of, you know, not kosher to do that, really.
No. Further reading.
So, yeah. Yeah. So, you know, to a certain degree, it's kind of my magnum opus. Like, this is the course I developed over 20 years, and it's literally tested over and over again every year with students. So I know it works. I know it explains and gets people from, I know nothing, but I'm interested in being a witch, to I can now go out and either find a group or not find a group. Either way, I've got the skills, and I can, and if I find a group, I have all the skills to recognize when it's a good group, and a good group for me, as opposed to something predatory.
Yeah. I do think discernment, like like in the, you know, the intro books that we probably read 90s, you know, discernment was not as much of a conversation as it is now. I mean, I think it was there. There were hints of it, but never like, here are the red flags that you need to look for.
Yeah. I mean, you know, there are some essays I wrote in the early 2000s, you know, all about pagan predators, you know, what are the red flags of joining a group? You know, what things to make you run? And, you know, there are people who've written those things, but there are a whole lot more stories about people who don't want to do any group work ever because, they had a bad experience.
Right. Or
their good friend had a bad experience, or they've heard that the rumors that you can't tell who's a good group and not in this area because of witch wars or whatever. And it's just a real shame, because the power of working with a group is, I mean, not just literally the energetic power, but the feedback and the information sharing, and someone to come along and say, you are going down the wrong trail on that one. Not because it's a bad idea, just because that's just a dead end.
Yeah.
You know, like we know this. We've done it for a while.
Yeah.
So that was kind of my impetus. I mean, like, I went back to doing a beginner book after writing several advanced books. And because I think that there's a lot of ways to get started. And, you know, my particular view is very different from where most beginner books go to. I mean, we don't start, you know, you don't even do spellcraft until pretty much the very end. It's the last chapter, quite literally.
Yeah.
Because I think it's the least important thing. For all that, is the thing that gets most people excited and interested in witchcraft. Right. So, I mean, it's just, I think there's a lot of work to do before that. And I really wanted people to feel like Okay, so going back to a comment about success, it's a success if people say to me, I now understand that it's almost impossible for me to make a truly terrible mistake with magic. Because that's one of the wonderful things about witchcraft is if you are staying true to your needs and your desires and what you can do in the world rather than picking up someone else's way, then you are going to succeed. And okay, you forgot to call a quarter. You know what that means? It means that your circle didn't get created and your energy goes wonky and weird, and it probably won't be as successful working. Okay, do it again later, different time, whatever. I mean, you're not going to offend a being, you know. I mean, West will, if you forget to call West will still come to the next ritual that you call them for. You know, they're okay. But, you know, but I feel like a lot of people are like, oh, you know, is my altar right? Is this, did I do it right? And it's like, you know, it's kind of hard to do it wrong in a terrible, awful way. It's just, you know, you might just waste your energy or your time or your resources. But that's a whole different universe.
Yeah. I know. I love that idea of, like, you know, being true to yourself is really the most important thing. And I just was thinking of forgetting to call a quarter. And one of my early working with a group faux pas, I was the person who was supposed to release the quarters. And instead of saying, you know, go if you will, stay if you must, I basically said, you must go. Basically threw them out on their butts at the end. And I was like, oh, sorry.
Yep. And they came back the next time, right?
They came back the next time. Too. Yeah. So it was just one of those moments where you're like, oh, yeah, this is what happens when your mouth works faster than your brain.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, we all have those stories. I mean, everything from, you know, I leaned over to light the candle and, well, suddenly something extra was on fire.
Yeah. Yeah. Fire safety is so important in witchcraft, and people just forget that.
No, I know. It's way too often. And, you know, okay, so the worst thing is you had to run out of the circle. You didn't properly open the circle, so it popped like a soap bubble. Okay, but your house didn't catch on fire.
Right, which is more important in that moment.
More important.
Yeah, any spirits that were there, but like, we get it. It's okay. Go put yourself out. Oh, so in kind of revisiting, I mean, you teach the class all the time, so I guess revisiting might not be the right word in this case, but like in writing this book for people coming into their practice, did anything like shift in your practice, or did you rethink parts of your practice, or is it just like kind of this is how things are done, so it wasn't much of that with this book?
I won't say that there was a shift, because again, I do this course every year with newcomers, and I learn something every single year. I mean, my students over the years have been fantastic for keeping me flexible and moving forward and changing. There's nothing static about my practice. But what I found actually was it was really wonderful to concentrate so completely on the sort of core practice and core principles and getting back to the basics again. You know, shifting how I have to talk about it because I'm in a different medium. You know, it's really easy to teach meditation when you're in a Zoom room and you're talking to people about meditation, and then you all meditate for a few minutes, you know, and then talk about it. Well, in a book, I can only tell you to do that, and you know, hope to go back.
Debrief after,
right? No debriefing, you know. So we have to sort of think about how you want to handle that. But what I found myself doing was realizing more and more that my own practice continues to get eclectic and draw from the vast well of eclectic as opposed to some other label or name or tradition, you know, to have it come from. And, you know, huge respect to my various teachers over the year for giving me a framework that I can build on. I mean, then I think it's kind of, I mean, there's frameworks in witchcraft that we're all using. I mean, classic neo-pagan ritual framework, most of us are using some variation of it. And there's a resonance there because it works.
Yeah.
You know, and seeing that again and then having to explain it. Actually, it's one of my few drawings in the book. It's like, oh no, it looks like this. It's not a triangle, not how ritual works. It's a, what's it, ziggurat?
Yeah.
The little steppy things. Yeah. That's much more how ritual goes. There's little pausing things.
I did enjoy the diagrams of the book because I think they're perfectly situated. I had never thought about the invoking and banishing pentagrams related to the elements.
Yeah.
So that was a new wrinkle in my brain.
Oh, good. I'm glad. See, there's things where people have been doing this for a while too. And that's, you know, that was just something I was taught a really long time ago. I still usually do just one pentagram for invoking and banishing, but it shifts the energy quite a bit when you actually shift how you do your pentagrams. And it's fascinating to see that and then give that to newcomers. I have a little spell that I do whenever I see roadkill. It's a little creepy, but when I see roadkill, I actually do an invoking pentagram and I bless the roadkill and send it on to the Lord and Lady, and then I do a banishing pentagram. So it's like I open a little portal and it kind of hops through and then I close it.
Yeah, I always bless them when I see them. Yeah, it just the most shocking one to me, and I've told a couple people this. I drove, my son and his partner live in Maine, and before we moved to California, I drove from Tennessee to Maine to see them, and I saw a bear as roadkill, which I had never seen in my entire life on the road, like in New Hampshire, and I had to pull over at the next stop because I was so shaken by the fact that there had been this dead bear on the side of the road. I mean, you're used to seeing, you know, deer and, you know, depending on where you're, armadillo, you know, wherever, but I had never seen a bear, and it just like hit me hard.
Yeah, that would, I don't know that I've even would have made it that far because that would have shocked me.
It was in like one of those shoot kind of things, which is why I think it happened where it did. So there was really nowhere to stop. I had to keep going. So I would have pulled over immediately, but I couldn't. There was no place to pull over. I had to keep going. But
both of you actually. So that would have horrified me.
Yeah, it was a weird one, and I was just like, oh, wow, I've just never thought I would see that in my entire life. I mean, I've seen live bear in the Smokies, but I had never seen a dead bear like that. It was just horrific.
Ew.
Yeah. So it's nice to know other people do that because I always think I'm a little weird too, and I'm like, maybe we're not as weird as we think we are.
I've been doing it for decades. Actually, it's one of my earliest things. One of my early practices that.
Do you do it with ambulances too? I do it with ambulances always.
I don't do it with ambulances. I sort of feel like people are on their own. It's kind of funny. Although, do I actually know what? I am starting to do it with ambulances here where I live because it is far less common to hear an ambulance where I now live. And so I think I was living in a more urban environment where it would have
been every time. Yeah,
it was just a lot. So
I know. And I grew up in the South, so you know the funeral procession things where you pull over, that was very much it's still a thing. I went to visit friends this summer, and between Nashville and Chattanooga I encountered one and had to pull over and wait a little while.
Here, actually, people don't drive from the church to the cemetery because their church tends to be at the cemetery.
They're right there,
really, really close. So it's a procession. And when people on the street see the funeral procession going by, they stop and they wait respectfully while it goes by. And the one time I did see, they had to drive about a half a mile. There weren't lights or anything like that, but they were basically an end and everyone knew what it was. Yeah, some magic signal that I haven't picked up quite yet, but you know, people stopped and just let it happen. And it was really very, very interesting and really nice to see that sort of return to the respectful tradition of honoring the dead as they go by.
Yeah.
Sort of thing.
Yeah. I know. My husband is from Trinidad, and I've said this 1,000 times on the show, and people are probably sick of hearing me say it. But the first time we encountered it, he was like, "Why are people pulling over?" And I was like, "People have to drive." Like you said, people have to drive to the cemetery. That you can't walk to it, and so that's why. And he was like, "Oh, okay." But he would rather get where he's going fast. So he was a little confused by that. But yeah, one of the other things in your book that I thought was interesting, and I think I've seen it in other kind of introductory books, but you actually have a conversation you discuss early in the book about what it is to call yourself a witch. And I just kind of wondered, for you, what is that? Like, how did you get, because it is a word with a lot of baggage. So how did you decide, this is what I'm going to call myself?
Still has a lot of baggage. That's the part that actually sort of gets me every once in a while, because I've been calling myself a witch for about, going on 4 decades.
Yeah.
Heading towards 4 decades. So I took the word when I was a teenager, because that's when I kind of got started, and held it through all the years. And every once in a while I'll say, well, I'm a pagan. You know, if I have to talk to people who I don't think are going to be very receptive to the word witch, I might usually just say pagan. Just because that's a little smoother for most people, you know, or non-practicing religious or something like that. But there's lots of dances you do. For me, a witch is very much a person who does a lot of work getting into the local energy. Basically attuning to the energy of the environment and the time and the space. And in doing so is able to just kind of use a little bit of magic energy, really, to just nudge things a little bit more the way they want them to be. And those little nudges just add up over time into large changes. For me, there were 2 things that attracted me at the outset for being a witch. One of which was honestly the notion of having control over your environment, really. Because I'm a teenager, back then, and it was just like the world is going
in control. Yeah,
exactly. It's like, what? This is a practice that gives me control over things. I'm on, because no one else was doing it. And the second thing was this notion of responsibility. And it's always been attractive to me. I think it's the fundamental core thing about being a witch, as opposed to many other religions, which is you have to take responsibility for your actions and the consequences of your actions, seen and unseen. And there's a lifetime right there. You never stop doing that. There's always more to get in right alignment with, or, be better attuned to, or understand yourself better. Or, I'm going through a course right now where I'm popping myself back into doing shadow work, and I'm laughing at myself because the last time I did it, I was like, well, I'm done. No more shadow work. I got this. Yeah. I love seeing that to witches, because we always giggle, because it's like, oh yeah,
Yeah, we've all said it.
Maybe
we're all like, no,
deathbed.
No,
no, it never stops. And life should be bringing you new opportunities to get better. Get more right. And there's no shame attached to that. It's just, it's a path of inquisitiveness.
Right.
And when I stop doing that, I should be on my deathbed, because that's about the only time.
Yeah, I do think, like, whatever path you've chosen, like, stagnation is never good, right? Like, that's a problem. So you have to continue to grow and learn. And, I like to think of myself as a perpetual student, just because I know there's a lot of, I know a tiny amount, but enough to know there's a lot I don't know. So.
Oh yeah. On so many things. And then you meet a new person who brings a different perspective to things. It's like, oh, that's it. I'm done.
Or you read a new book.
More.
Or, it's just forever. And then on the shadow work side, it's like, you do mention Jung in your book. And I was like, witches and Jung is the shadow.
Yep. Like Campbell and Jung. Thanks, guys. Literally.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, I will not speak for all people who are drawn to paganism, witchcraft, Wicca, cunning work, whatever they choose to call it. But I do think you have to be a little bit in touch with your shadow side to even want to go there. So,
yes, I think
because it is a shadow of the overculture in a way.
Exactly.
So
you have to be, and I think that's the difference between someone who is just stepping into the pool, if you will, dabbling their toes and seeing what it's like, because it's really easy to get distracted at that level, and it's really hard. You have no sense of discernment because you have no experience to bring to discernment. And there's a lot of shiny things going on at the edges that can be, they could just pull you into not useless, but not as effective practices. Let's put it that way. And I firmly believe that all the right people who are really finding their home in witchcraft come eventually to sort of the core practices because they're out there and they're efficient and they work, and you kind of get there eventually. But there are a lot of shiny distractions at the corner and or the edge of the pool, and it's fascinating to see. Well, and also there's a lot of money. There's a lot of money in all of those distractions. I mean, when Sephora does a witch's magic makeup collection, then big department stores selling a whole line of witch-related home goods. It's like, what?
Yeah. We become a target market.
Exactly. The number of candles I have really has nothing to do with my practice. And in fact, actually, I'm doing a really fascinating thing right now. I mean, my husband and I sold literally everything we own except for 8 duffel bags and 4 boxes, and moved to Portugal last year. One of the few things I kept was a box of magical tools, but we didn't unbox them for almost this entire year. So my practice has been very mental and very, very micro. It has been what goes on my desk, and it's just a reminder of the 4 elements, basically. I have a little jaguar statue that my first teacher gave me 30 odd years ago, long before I knew jaguar mode was going to exist. And, but that's it, because that's what can go in my suitcase.
Yeah.
And that's been a very interesting mode of getting into, what is actually necessary. What's to focus in on the utter essentials. And that has actually changed my practice a little bit, changed my thinking about my practice more than anything. That, by the way, is the 3rd book that is teasing my attention, is what it's like to do witchcraft in a minimal and traveling mode. So,
yeah. Oh, I like that. Yeah. It is also a personal interest of mine. So I'll be looking forward to that book when it emerges. So I sent you the question so you know that we have a little game of chance at the end for the last question. But before we get there, I wanted to give you an opportunity to tell people, kind of talked about your upcoming projects, but where they can find you or if there's anything coming up. And this will air in the new year. So I think, after the end of the year.
Cool. Great. Actually, I'm excited that it's going to be a little ways out because I don't want everything to be all in October. Then people get overwhelmed. So that's good. So I can always be found online at the very easy to remember lisamcsherry.com. And all of my projects are there, appearances. I have a blog that I write every week or so, and articles, You know, if I send an article to a publisher and they don't want it, it'll usually end up on my website. So, you know, it still gets out there. And there's links there to my previous books, Virtual Pagan 2.0 and Magical Connections. And my new book, A Witch's Guide to Crafting Your Spiritual Practice, will be linked there with reviews and other fun things. If I'm doing an appearance for a podcast, information will be there as always. And you can contact me.
Awesome.
The class that I teach is at jaguarmoon.org. The facingnorth.net is my review site. It's a community resource. We've got about 3,000 reviews there, and we post about 10 reviews every month. So it is one of the most prolific offerings of reviews of interest on all of these titles to the alternative spiritual community. Not just witchcraft, it's healing and Norse and divination and all the things, music in some cases.
Awesome.
So yes, I have a lot of presence.
Yeah. And good resources too. All right. So I am going to roll a die.
Not six.
You don't want to be. I also tell people we don't have rules, so you can always say, please roll again. And we're going to get a topic that we're not supposed to talk about in polite company. You know, my Scorpio moon and sun just like to be contrary. So death, sex, religion, politics, or money. And if I roll 6, you get to pick which one you want. Or you can say roll again, Victoria. I don't want to pick. 2, sex. What the year? So I did notice in your book, you talk a little bit in the Raising Power section about using sex as a way to raise energy, which I think a lot of people don't touch on in intro books, frankly. So I kind of wondered, like, for you or like in your practice or with your students, when are spells or what spells are suited to sex magic or raising power for you? Like when is that the most appropriate way to raise energy?
I think, the easy one is when you're in a relationship. You know, doing sex magic with another person that you're in a relationship with is a great way to open yourselves up to a deeper practice and a deeper relationship. But really, any kind of intense energy working, I think, can benefit from sex magic. And it's also really important to remind people that sex magic does not include a partner necessarily. You can have sex with yourself and raise that energy with yourself. So I like when it is working with personal issues, self-love, self-care, nurturing the self, giving yourself the power to move out into the world, sort of that strength and confidence. These are all really good things to do sex magic for, and to think about how to, make your ritual happen. I think the tricky part is always that we don't necessarily have our working circles in our bedrooms. So you sort of have to shift how you think about getting comfortable and getting into that place. And I also think, you brought up, it's not necessarily something people talk about with beginners. And it's like, and that's sort of a shame because it's easy to raise power that way. Sometimes it's a lot easier than, dancing is probably the easiest, but, yoga, or something like that. I think sex is a lot more fun, actually. Not so great for group work.
And I do wonder if
my red flag.
And I was going to say, I do wonder if part of the reason why it isn't usually mentioned in beginning texts is because people have stepped back enough to go, I don't even want to have this conversation with someone new because it can go sideways too easily.
Well, I think there's a really big difference between talking about the technique of sex magic and saying to someone, let's practice sex magic.
Yes.
I mean, that's
red flag.
There's a yes, exactly. There's a universe of difference there.
Right.
And, And actually, I would say to people, if you're interested in looking at magical forms of sex magic, there's a really good book by Denning and Phillips, the name of which I forget, but it is something like Sexual Magic. And then the work of Margot Arnaud is fantastic. She's a little bit more tantric Eastern in her philosophy, but her core methodologies are excellent. And she's very body positive and open in her things, which is also the tricky part, because sex brings up a lot.
Yeah,
so
it brings up a lot of stuff.
I think working on personal issues is great.
Yeah, our culture doesn't do us any favors in that department, unfortunately. Yeah, a lot of shadow work in that area. So
the shadow work.
Yeah. Oh, but no, that's great. I writing the questions for folks. Like I always think about, like I wanted to kind of relate to your work. But sometimes, like, for some people, it's just difficult. Like, if sex hasn't come up at all in their work, it's like, how do I ask them a question about this without it just coming out of left field? So it's glad that you gave me an in. So thank you for writing the question.
Welcome. You're very welcome.
Yeah, it's, I don't know, it's just an interesting topic to me. And I think, one of the things, there's so much that we don't talk about in our culture. These things, death, sex, religion, politics, money, that we're not supposed to talk about. Or we talk about to death, like politics, and never get anywhere, but it's like in the, like this culture that, this subculture of witchcraft, like I said, I don't want to ever put labels on people like witchcraft, cutting craft, paganism, whatever label people choose for themselves. Like we should be able to talk about these things even more than other people. Like it should be part of our lingua franca, I guess, to have these conversations.
I think so. And there's been some terrible, terrible things that have happened in our community. And it does make frank discussions, honest discussions about sex and sexuality much more difficult. I find talking about sex kind of interesting in my groups because you can see who gets uncomfortable and who doesn't. Yeah. And we also tend to have multiple genders in our groups at any given time. So they're very different perspectives of what they consider sexual, including people who are asexual. So we try really hard to approach the conversation from a as open as possible perspective. We don't really do polarity. I mean, we do in a high level, but like on the everyday, day-to-day kind of thing, it's like, no, it's not just black and white,
right?
Male, female, blah, blah, blah. There is a huge range in there. It is a spectrum, and playing in different areas on that spectrum is fascinating. And most likely, most of us will do that over the course of our life. Yeah. I mean, how we are in our teens is not how we are sexually when we're in our 30s, for example, or, how I might be when I'm in my 70s. I mean, I don't know. I'm not there yet. So,
yeah. No, I always like to think, and I always say this, that like part of the acceptance, and not just acceptance, but integration of thought of gender being a spectrum, is that those of us who find ourselves on either end of the spectrum or closer to the ends of that spectrum aren't boxed into what it means to be a woman, to identify as a woman. Like if every expression of gender is integrated into what we do, then that does change, and it isn't a big deal. And, you don't have to meet these very defined things to be considered feminine or masculine, especially in a culture which puts so much definition on the masculine. Like, how dare you step outside of these 4 things? You can only be a man if you don't, and it's like, this is insane. This has got to go. It's making us all unhealthy.
Seriously. Absolutely. I mean, it's really, really bad on so many levels. And so when you find someone who's truly, for example, body positive, and that includes sex positive, it's like, oh, it's nice. Thank you. I like hanging out with you, at least, because I mean, it's shocking sometimes. I I am actually, on a personal level, I'm a very conservative kind of a person. I've been monogamous for all these years and, blah, blah, blah. But most of my friends aren't. And I'm so very glad, because every once in a while they'll say a thing and I'm like, oh, wait, that's a new phrase. Hold on. Let me catch up. What are you talking about? I mean, I still remember, it's been a couple decades now, but I still remember the first time one of the people in the coven referred to themselves as a bear. And I spent a long time thinking that was their spirit animal before I really finally got around to that's how they are sexually and they're dynamic. And it was like, oh.
Yes. Always learning. Always learning.
Always learning.
It should be very like the tagline for witchcraft. Always learning.
Always learning.
There you go.
Yeah. Well, yeah, okay. See, I gave you a phrase. I think I might steal that one.
There you go. Yeah. Positive exchange. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, I think that is a great place for us to wrap up. And I have so enjoyed this conversation, Lisa. Thank you so much for being on the show.
I'm so glad. Thank you. I have really enjoyed this as well. It's this has been a very good conversation, and I appreciate it.
Great.
WitchLit is a production of Thousand Volt Press and is edited by Kaifel Agostini. Our music is Voices by Alexander Shenekar. You can support our work at kofi.com/witchlitpodcast. And if you'd like to submit your own death, sex, religion, politics, or money questions, or have questions or comments about the show, you can send an email to victoria@witchlitpod.com. And please be sure to let us know if we can use your name on the show. Transcripts and all our previous episodes are available at witchlitpod.com, and you can follow us on Instagram and Twitter @witchlitpod. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and consider giving us a rating or review wherever you listen to podcasts. It helps other witches find the show. Thanks for listening and for reading witchy.